A future king draws a brutal line in the sand, and the reigning monarch breaks down in tears. In an unprecedented move shaking the foundations of the British monarchy, Prince William has reportedly declared that Prince Andrew, Meghan Markle, and Prince Harry are to be permanently cut off. No titles, no return, no redemption. This zero-tolerance policy on scandal, delivered with chilling finality, stunned insiders and left King Charles, who had quietly clung to hopes of reconciliation, in tears. Why now? What does this mean for the future of the crown? And how did it come to this? Stay with us as we unpack the royal shockwave that may have changed the monarchy forever. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. It all started with an unexpected silence. A silence so loud it echoed through the cold corridors of Buckingham Palace like a forgotten cry from the past. No announcements, no leaks, no vague press statements, just a sudden halt in the usual royal chatter. And then, one cold, firm sentence shattered the hush. There will be no titles, no return, no redemption for those who've disgraced the crown. The voice wasn't from the reigning king. It was from the man next in line, Prince William. In one unprecedented move, William drew a line so sharp it pierced through generations of royal tradition. And when the king heard it, he wept. But this wasn't a spontaneous family drama. No, this was years in the making, an eruption of tension, betrayal, shame, and failed reconciliation. What unfolded behind palace gates in the weeks leading up to this moment is the kind of story history books usually sanitize. But today, we're telling it as it truly happened, raw, emotional, and damning. The monarchy has always thrived on balance, tradition and change, dignity and duty, mercy and accountability. But now, that balance has been broken, possibly forever. The future king, Prince William, has officially made his decision, a decision so severe, so final, that not even his own father, King Charles III, could hold back the tears. This video takes you deep inside the royal power struggle that exploded when William reportedly chose to cut off three of the most controversial royal figures in modern history: his disgraced uncle, Prince Andrew, his estranged brother, Prince Harry, and the ever-polarizing Meghan Markle. What you're about to uncover are the motives, the backroom meetings, and the emotional casualties of what could be the most consequential royal decision since the abdication of King Edward VIII. This isn't about gossip. It's about legacy. It's about the crown's survival in a post-Elizabethan era. And most of all, it's about a son who, for the first time in public view, defied his own father not out of rebellion, but out of principle. Now, let's rewind. When Queen Elizabeth II passed away, many believed King Charles would usher in a new era of reconciliation. Unlike his mother, who was known for her stern silence, Charles has always been more emotive, more visibly affected by family strife. Early in his reign, there were whispers inside the palace suggesting he hoped to bridge gaps between factions of the family. He extended public invitations, encouraged behind-the-scenes talks, and even appeared willing to compromise with Harry and Meghan for the sake of public unity. But it didn't work. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex continued to operate from California, leveraging their royal titles for commercial gain. At least, that's how many insiders saw it. Prince Andrew, mired in controversy over his connections to convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, remained a disgraced figure despite Charles quietly financing his lifestyle and shielding him from full public humiliation. The monarchy, under Charles, had begun to look forgiving. But perhaps too forgiving. As the headlines about Meghan's tell-all interviews multiplied, and as Harry's memoir scorched the institution that raised him, William, the one expected to lead the future monarchy, reportedly lost patience. While Charles was still focused on soft diplomacy within the family, William was watching the crown's reputation erode. Royal aides close to William claim he became increasingly frustrated with his father's unwillingness to draw a firm boundary. To William, the monarchy was not just a family. It was an institution. And institutions don't survive by indulging those who actively try to undermine them. In private, William reportedly voiced concerns that the longer they delayed decisive action, the more irreversible the damage would become. The Sussexes were still selling their royal story to global audiences. Prince Andrew's presence still tainted the brand, and the public, particularly the younger generation, was increasingly questioning the relevance of the monarchy. And then came the turning point. A confidential strategy meeting held at Kensington Palace, attended by William and his most trusted advisors. What happened behind those walls would shape the monarchy's path for the next generation. Multiple royal sources confirm that this is where William made up his mind. The Sussexes and Andrew would be completely and permanently cut off. No titles. No return to royal duties. No further attempts at rehabilitation. Notably absent from that meeting? King Charles. When the king was later briefed on William's position, he was reportedly shaken. For Charles, it wasn't just about duty, it was about his children, his brother, and the impossible tightrope between being a father and being a king. His attempts at quiet reconciliation had failed. Now, the future monarch was rewriting the rules. One palace insider revealed His Majesty broke down in tears. He had always hoped for healing. But William's resolve left no room for hope. And that's where the pain runs deepest. Not in the public spectacle, but in the private heartbreak. Charles is said to have confided in close aides that he never imagined a time where his two sons would be officially estranged under royal decree, not out of scandal alone, but by executive choice of the future king. For William, this was not a cold-blooded move. This was strategic and deeply necessary. His decision wasn't just about the individuals involved. It was about resetting the monarchy's direction, restoring dignity and seriousness to the royal image in a world that no longer tolerates blurred lines between duty and self-promotion. In this video, we'll dissect every angle. The internal memos exchanged between aides, the leaked quotes from royal insiders, the social media firestorm following William's decision, and the emotional fallout that left King Charles devastated. We'll also examine the historical implications of this move, looking back at moments in royal history where similar ruptures occurred and what happened next. What does this mean for Harry and Meghan? Will they fight back? What becomes of Andrew now that his quiet exile is turning into formal banishment? And most importantly, what does this tell us about the future King William, not just as a figurehead, but as a leader unafraid to wield the full weight of royal authority? The crown is at a crossroads. And if William's decision stands unchallenged, it may mark the beginning of a monarchy shaped less by bloodlines and sentiment, and more by reputation, accountability, and unflinching discipline. By the end of this video, you'll have heard the full story of how a prince made his move, a king shed a tear, and a royal institution crossed a line from which there may be no return. Stay with us. The truth is only just beginning to unfold. The fractures within the royal family didn't appear overnight. They weren't born of a single fight, nor ignited by one scathing headline. They were the result of years, even decades, of tension, resentment, rivalry, and the slow unraveling of trust behind palace walls. To truly understand Prince William's shocking decision to permanently cut off Prince Andrew, Meghan Markle, and Prince Harry, we must go back and look at the slow erosion of unity within the House of Windsor. In public, the royal family is a symbol of tradition, dignity, and continuity. In private, it is a family like any other, vulnerable to miscommunication, betrayal, competition, and emotional wounds that never fully heal. But unlike most families, their pain plays out beneath the scrutiny of cameras, tabloids, and centuries of constitutional expectation. Let's begin with Prince Andrew, once regarded as the Queen's favorite son. In his youth, Andrew was admired for his military service during the Falklands War and his charm during royal engagements. But over the years, that public admiration soured. Rumors of extravagance, arrogance, and entitlement dogged his name. Still, it wasn't until his association with the convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein that Andrew's royal reputation truly collapsed. The fallout from Andrew's infamous BBC interview, where he attempted to explain away his ties to Epstein, was catastrophic. The public response was swift and unforgiving. Charities distanced themselves. His patronages dried up. Buckingham Palace was thrown into a full-blown crisis. The Queen, under immense pressure, was forced to strip her own son of his royal duties. He retreated from public life, becoming a royal in name only, still drawing financial support from the Crown estate and his mother, but permanently sidelined. While Andrew's disgrace was a scandal rooted in association and poor judgment, Harry and Meghan's situation was different, yet no less explosive. When Meghan Markle entered the royal family, many believed she was a breath of fresh air. An American actress of mixed race, successful in her own right, and charismatic in public engagements, she seemed the perfect modern addition to the monarchy. Her wedding to Prince Harry in 2018 was a global event that symbolized hope, diversity, and the evolution of the royal image. But behind the scenes, things were already cracking. Reports of staff resignations, alleged disputes between Meghan and Catherine, Duchess of Cambridge, and complaints about Meghan's approach to royal protocol began to trickle into the press. The couple's relationship with the media deteriorated rapidly, and soon Harry and Meghan were at odds not only with the press, but also with the palace machinery itself. Then came the bombshell. In January 2020, Harry and Meghan announced they would step back from royal duties and relocate to North America. Dubbed Megxit by the media, their departure was seen by many as an act of abandonment. To others, it was a necessary escape from an institution they felt was stifling and unsupportive. But no matter the perspective, the move created a massive rupture. The Queen quickly released a carefully worded statement that expressed support, but also regret. Prince Charles was reportedly stunned. Prince William was furious. And from that moment on, the division wasn't just personal, it was public. Following their departure, Harry and Meghan gave a series of high-profile interviews, none more damning than their March 2021 sit-down with Oprah Winfrey. In it, they accused the royal institution of ignoring Meghan's cries for help during her mental health crisis, revealed that there were concerns and conversations about the skin tone of their then-unborn son, Archie, and painted a picture of a cold, uncaring monarchy. The interview caused global backlash. While some sympathized with the couple, others viewed it as a betrayal. For many within the palace, it was seen as an unforgivable breach of royal confidentiality and decorum. Since then, Harry's memoir and Meghan's podcast series have continued to draw attention, often casting members of the royal family and their aides in a negative light. With every interview and every headline, trust between the Sussexes and the rest of the royal family continued to erode. And at the center of it all stood King Charles. A man trying to maintain the image of unity while juggling the emotional toll of seeing his sons at war, his brother disgraced, and his own reign starting under a cloud of family strife. It's important to note that Charles was deeply invested in finding a way to heal the family. His Christmas addresses, public speeches, and behind-the-scenes gestures hinted at a desire for reconciliation. Insiders revealed that he kept communication channels open with Harry and Meghan, even when others in the palace had gone quiet. He reportedly advocated for a place for them in royal ceremonies, like the coronation, albeit limited. He was seen as a father trying to mend what fame, trauma, and media storms had torn apart. But William? He had a different vision. While Charles sought to be the monarch who unified, William increasingly saw himself as the future king who must protect the institution, even at the cost of personal relationships. As second in line to the throne, he bore the weight of future expectations. Every public appearance, every speech, every scandal connected to his family would eventually reflect on him and the reign he would one day assume. The royal family was no longer simply under media fire. They were hemorrhaging credibility. And as Harry and Meghan continued their media narrative from California, William reportedly felt the monarchy's ability to maintain dignity and discretion slipping further and further away. Behind closed doors, William began tightening his circle. He met with senior aides to discuss long-term strategies for preserving the monarchy's relevance and reputation. One of those strategies, sources say, involved preparing to draw permanent boundaries, not just temporary sanctions, around those whose actions he believed had undermined the crown. And that's where the divide between father and son became most visible. Charles, raised under a monarchy defined by symbolism and sentiment, viewed the royal family through the lens of emotional legacy. William, shaped by modern media warfare and institutional vulnerability, viewed it through the lens of preservation and accountability. This philosophical rift quietly hardened over the past 2 years. While Charles attempted gentle inclusion, William reportedly grew frustrated with his father's indecisiveness. He saw reconciliation not as healing, but as enabling. As for the public, reactions were divided. Polls taken in the wake of Harry and Meghan's interviews showed a generational split. Older Britons largely sided with the traditional royal stance. Younger audiences were more sympathetic to the Sussexes. Meanwhile, support for Prince Andrew was virtually non-existent. He had become a symbol of royal rot, an image the institution was desperate to move on from. And this is where the weight of history comes in. The British monarchy has always depended on discipline, internal and external. For every scandal, there has been an equal and opposite act of restoration. Whether it was the abdication crisis of Edward VIII, the dissolution of Princess Margaret's controversial romance, or the enforced silence around Princess Diana's inner life before her death, the monarchy has long been a machine of containment. But this time, containment was no longer working. In the digital age, scandal doesn't go away. It trends. It lives online. It multiplies. And for William, a future king watching the crown's authority erode in real time, the choice was clear. The family needed a reckoning. And so, the background to William's final declaration isn't just about the last few months. It's about years of accumulating pressure, of unresolved pain, of failed second chances. It's about a monarchy trying to stay relevant in a world that demands transparency, fairness, and accountability, even from kings and queens. The decision to permanently cut off Andrew, Harry, and Meghan wasn't spontaneous. It was the outcome of a slow-burning fire, finally reaching its flashpoint. The transition from prince to king-in-waiting is not a ceremonial moment marked by trumpets and red carpets. It is a gradual, often invisible, process of absorbing responsibility, developing foresight, and cultivating the ability to make hard, often unpopular decisions. In Prince William's case, that process accelerated the moment Queen Elizabeth II passed away. In the wake of her death, the public and palace alike began looking to the future, and the future had a name: William. For decades, William lived under the towering shadow of both his grandmother and his father. As second in line to the throne, he was often seen but rarely heard in matters of real policy or family governance. He carried out royal duties, represented the crown abroad, and upheld ceremonial traditions, but never acted as the decision-maker. That, after all, was Charles's role. But as the scandals surrounding the Sussexes and Prince Andrew deepened, and as King Charles attempted to preserve familial unity, William began to show signs of stepping into a different role, not just as the heir, but as the steward of the monarchy's future. This shift wasn't overt. There were no loud declarations or public rebukes. But behind closed doors, his presence grew more assertive, his voice more consequential. Palace staff began to refer to William's team as a distinct and independent force within the royal household, separate from Charles and Camilla's network, and operating with a modern, media-savvy strategy rooted in preservation rather than repair. Insiders began to note that William's private meetings with advisors were growing more frequent and strategic in nature. These weren't simple scheduling discussions. They were forward-planning sessions, scenario analyses, and media response rehearsals. While Charles was still grappling with the emotional complexities of family, William was strategizing how to contain, and eventually eliminate, the threats to the monarchy's image and function. One royal aide close to Kensington Palace described William's transformation in stark terms. "He stopped thinking like a son and started thinking like a king," they said. He wasn't cold. He was focused. A defining moment came when William began holding private briefings with senior constitutional advisors, the same experts who had once served Queen Elizabeth during the Diana years. According to multiple sources, William posed blunt questions during these meetings. What are the legal limits of royal authority? Can royal titles be revoked permanently? What constitutional mechanisms exist to remove individuals from the line of succession or from public royal roles altogether? It became clear he wasn't seeking advice on reconciliation. He was preparing for action. While Charles was still permitting limited ceremonial participation from Harry during events like the coronation and trying to keep family bonds from publicly imploding, William was formulating a list of individuals whose continued association with the monarchy, in any capacity, posed a risk to the institution's future. At the top of that list were Prince Andrew, Prince Harry, and Meghan Markle. To understand William's mindset, we have to step into the worldview of a man who grew up watching his mother's life torn apart by media scrutiny, institutional coldness, and family infighting. He saw the crown try to preserve its image by silencing her, then scramble to recover its credibility after her tragic death. He witnessed firsthand how fragile public trust could be and how dangerous it was to ignore warning signs. Now, decades later, William found himself facing a different kind of crisis, one not of his making, but one he would eventually have to inherit. The Sussexes had weaponized their royal story in a way no one in the family had ever done before. Andrew had become a pariah. The monarchy's moral high ground, already eroded by past scandals, was now slipping away with every podcast episode, every interview, every new Netflix special. William understood that doing nothing was itself a decision, and a dangerous one. His advisors reportedly laid out several options: maintain quiet distance, issue carefully worded statements, create ceremonial roles without real influence, or take decisive, formal action to sever ties and redefine the monarchy's composition. William chose the last. At a confidential meeting inside Kensington Palace attended by his most trusted circle, including key members of his communications and legal teams, William made his intentions clear. The monarchy must cut ties with any individual whose presence compromises its integrity. No exceptions. The meeting was described as businesslike, not emotional. William listened. He asked sharp, concise questions. He weighed the optics, the backlash, the constitutional implications. And then he said, "This isn't personal. This is structural. If the crown is to survive, it must be worthy of survival." That single sentence, according to a palace insider, marked the beginning of what would become a radical restructuring of the royal family under William's watch. His decision wasn't made in isolation. Over the next several weeks, he met quietly with senior figures in the cabinet, Church of England liaisons, and Commonwealth representatives. He wasn't seeking permission. He was preparing the groundwork. His argument was simple. The monarchy must be above scandal, beyond reproach, and unapologetically committed to public service. Any member who violates that standard, even through indirect association, must be permanently separated from the institution. This is what made William's position so unprecedented. He wasn't just calling for temporary suspensions or negotiated retirements. He was calling for permanent, irreversible disassociation. This included advocating for the revocation of all honorary military titles held by Harry and Andrew, the complete removal of HRH styling from any public-facing documents, the elimination of any future funding drawn from the Duchy of Cornwall or sovereign grant, the exclusion of all three individuals from state occasions, balcony appearances, and royal tours. In internal communications, William insisted that the Sussexes' commercial ventures in the United States, many of which lean heavily on their royal identity, were incompatible with the values of service and duty. To continue allowing even a symbolic connection, in his view, would send the wrong message to the British public and Commonwealth partners. He was also deeply concerned about the monarchy's standing among the military community. As a former service member himself, William felt that figures like Andrew and Harry, both of whom had served in the armed forces, had turned their service into shields against accountability. William wanted to draw a clear line. Military honor must be earned and maintained, not used as a public relations asset. Still, despite William's growing confidence and resolve, there was one obstacle that he could not immediately overcome: King Charles himself. Charles had been hoping for a softer approach. He believed, perhaps naively, that family ties could still mend. Charles feared that a public banishment would appear cruel and vindictive. For weeks, he reportedly pleaded with William to reconsider, to find a middle path. But William would not budge. At one point, a close family confidant reportedly warned Charles, "You raised a king, not just a son. He's acting on what you taught him, duty first." As the pressure mounted, Charles finally agreed to step aside and let William's strategy proceed. But not without emotional cost. Upon hearing the final decision read out during a private meeting at Clarence House, Charles, according to one source, placed his head in his hands and wept. The formal public statement would come later. But within palace walls, it was already being treated as law. Andrew, Meghan, and Harry were out, not in name only, but in every way that mattered to the institution. And William? He had crossed a threshold. No longer just a supportive heir walking in his grandmother's footsteps, he had become an architect of the monarchy's next chapter. A man prepared not just to inherit the crown, but to shape it, even if that meant breaking from the past and standing against the very family he once sought to protect. There are moments in royal history that are marked not by celebration but by reckoning, moments where difficult lines are drawn, not with joy, but with resolve. Prince William's public declaration that Prince Andrew, Prince Harry, and Meghan Markle would be cut off permanently was exactly that. Not a triumph, but a controlled demolition of bridges already burning. It wasn't an impulsive outburst. It was deliberate, calculated, and most of all, final. The sentence itself was simple, sharp, and unmistakable in tone. There will be no titles, no return, no redemption for those who've disgraced the crown. It didn't need elaboration. Those who heard it knew exactly who it targeted and what it meant. It was a royal guillotine, swift, decisive, and irreversible. When the decision was first leaked to the press, it didn't appear in grand headlines or official bulletins. It emerged quietly, almost whispered, in tight-knit royal circles and discreet press briefings. At first, many questioned the authenticity of the leak. Could William really have gone that far? Would King Charles allow such a move without resistance? But as confirmations trickled in from palace insiders, media editors, and well-placed sources, the reality crystallized. This wasn't rumor. This was royal policy, newly minted by the man who would be king. The decision encompassed 3 individuals, but the impact was far greater than the names on the list. It signaled a new approach to monarchy, one defined not by forgiveness or image management, but by standards and consequences. The language was intentionally firm. No titles meant exactly that. Meghan and Harry would no longer be referred to in any official capacity as the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. Their HRH styling, already inactive by agreement since 2020, would be permanently revoked by letters patent under William's future authority. For Prince Andrew, the Duke of York title would remain in name but would be effectively retired from all usage, including by third-party organizations and charities. William's team had begun working closely with advisors to ensure these directives would be observed by all government communications, official court circulars, and public institutions. No return meant they would never again take part in royal ceremonies. Not even symbolic or background roles. There would be no balcony appearances, no invitations to state events, no seats at official family meetings involving the crown's interests. This exclusion would extend to coronations, royal jubilees, and Remembrance Day commemorations. Even behind-the-scenes roles, such as informal advisors or private family representatives, would be off the table. And finally, no redemption was the most damning phrase of all. It meant the door was closed, locked, bolted, and buried under the floorboards. No future apology, no charitable deed, no negotiated compromise would bring them back into the fold. The road to rehabilitation had been officially shut down. Why such extreme finality? That was the question asked by both allies and critics of the monarchy. According to palace sources, the rationale behind William's decision rested on one core belief, that public trust in the monarchy could no longer withstand ambiguity. In the past, royals embroiled in controversy were often shuffled into quiet roles, sent abroad, or left to fade from view with polite dignity. But in the digital age, where every scandal trends within minutes and the line between private and public has all but disappeared, quiet retreat was no longer enough. The public demanded accountability, and William intended to deliver it. Royal observers believe the timing of the decision was also crucial. With King Charles's health becoming an increasing concern, William recognized the need to establish himself as a proactive leader long before the throne was his. He didn't want to inherit a monarchy in crisis. He wanted to shape a monarchy already in control of its narrative. The reaction inside the palace was mixed. Some senior aides, particularly those loyal to King Charles, were reportedly shocked by the severity of William's position. One source claimed that Charles had hoped William might settle on a long-term probation model, keeping the 3 in exile but not severing all ties permanently. But William was insistent. Anything less would continue the cycle of scandal and recovery that had plagued the family since Diana's era. Behind William's boldness was a team of strategic minds. His private secretary, communications advisors, legal consultants, and even military liaisons contributed to what was essentially a roadmap for complete dissociation. Their plan addressed every scenario: media response, public backlash, Commonwealth inquiries, even internal resistance from royal relatives. They had also studied precedent. Royal history offered few examples as direct and uncompromising as this. The most comparable event was perhaps the abdication of Edward VIII, who relinquished the throne to Mary Wallis Simpson, an American divorcee deemed unacceptable by royal standards at the time. Even in that case, Edward was given a dukedom and allowed to live abroad with a pension. What William proposed was harsher. Not abdication, but erasure. Not exile, but annulment. Not scandal avoidance, but public disowning. The legal process for such actions required consultation with the Crown Office and Privy Council. While William was not yet king, his role as Prince of Wales gave him enormous influence, especially when supported by the reigning monarch. Sources indicate that Charles, after considerable hesitation, eventually gave reluctant approval for William to proceed in shaping the monarchy's future structure. Public confirmation of the decision was made through a carefully worded statement released by Kensington Palace. It didn't name names, but its implications were unmistakable. The statement emphasized William's commitment to a monarchy grounded in service, integrity, and national trust. It referred to a forward-looking vision that honors the sacrifices of those who serve and upholds the dignity of public office. And it made one key point. Membership in the royal household is a privilege earned by duty, not birthright alone. The media reaction was instant. Headlines ranged from celebratory to critical. Some praised William's decisiveness, calling it a long-overdue move to modernize and discipline the royal family. Others questioned the timing and feared that such a permanent break might deepen divisions or embolden anti-monarchist sentiment. In America, the reaction was especially fierce. Meghan and Harry's defenders accused William of cruelty, of punishing a couple for telling their truth, and of using royal power to silence dissent. U.S. talk shows, podcasts, and media commentators reignited the debate over monarchy's role in the 21st century. On social media, hashtags exploded overnight, some in support of William, others defending Meghan and Harry. But inside Britain, the mood was different. A Snap poll taken within 48 hours of the announcement showed that over 65% of respondents supported the move. Among those aged 45 and above, support rose to over 75%. Among veterans and military families, the number was even higher. It wasn't just about scandal fatigue. It was about a growing belief that the monarchy could not continue as a hybrid, a mix of traditional service and modern celebrity. The people wanted clarity. William had delivered it. Notably, other members of the royal family remained largely silent. Princess Anne, known for her discretion and loyalty to the institution, reportedly backed William's strategy. Prince Edward, ever diplomatic, is said to have agreed with the decision in principle but expressed concern about its emotional fallout. Queen Camilla, a target of media criticism herself in the past, reportedly urged Charles to support his son, even if it meant heartbreak. And heartbreak there was. King Charles, upon reading the full final report prepared by William's office, reportedly sat in silence for nearly an hour. According to a senior staff member, he was visibly shaken. He knew this day might come, the aide said, but he hoped it would be after he was gone. For Charles, the decision represented not just a structural shift, but a personal failure. He had hoped to reunite his sons, to leave behind a family not at peace, perhaps, but at least in contact. William's decision obliterated that hope. And yet, even in his pain, Charles did not object. He understood that leadership sometimes means choosing country over kin. And as he looked across the generations, from himself to William, and eventually to George, he saw a hard truth. The monarchy, if it is to endure, must evolve. And evolution demands sacrifice. The image of a monarch is often sculpted in stoicism, a symbol of steadiness in a chaotic world. But behind the iron suits and rehearsed speeches are men and women carrying the weight of centuries, traditions, and the lives of their own blood. King Charles III has spent his entire life preparing to rule, yet nothing in his vast training could have prepared him for this. Watching his eldest son, the future king, close the door on his youngest son and his brother with ruthless finality. Charles has always been a deeply emotional man. Unlike Queen Elizabeth II, who led with a silence so powerful it became iconic, Charles has often worn his heart on his sleeve. His voice trembles during tributes. His eyes water at military ceremonies. And when he speaks of family, he speaks as a father first, not as sovereign. This emotional vulnerability has made him both endearing and, at times, fragile under pressure. So when the full consequences of William's declaration were laid out before him, it didn't take long for the impact to break through the royal restraint. According to a longtime staffer at Clarence House, King Charles sat motionless for what felt like an eternity after hearing William's plan. The room remained silent until the king lowered his head into his hands and wept. This wasn't just the reaction of a monarch grappling with constitutional reform. It was the sorrow of a father forced to accept that his family, once seen as the heart of British national identity, had cracked beyond repair. Charles had never been blind to the damage caused by Andrew's scandals or Harry and Meghan's media onslaught. He understood, perhaps better than anyone, the wounds inflicted on the monarchy. But he also understood, perhaps too deeply, the circumstances that led there. With Andrew, Charles knew his brother's indulgent lifestyle and arrogant misjudgments had left a trail of destruction. From his lavish spending as a trade envoy to the humiliating Epstein associations, Charles had often spoken privately of his disappointment in Andrew's behavior. Yet despite the disgrace, Charles continued to protect him, shielding him from total collapse by quietly funding his private security and allowing him to remain at Royal Lodge. It wasn't an act of favoritism, but an act of loyalty. Charles viewed Andrew as a fallen brother who could still be preserved with silence and boundaries. But now, William had made that impossible. The protective shield was gone. Andrew was not only disgraced, he was disowned in all but name. And then there was Harry. For Charles, the rift with Harry cut far deeper than the troubles with Andrew. His youngest son was once the wild child of the family, impulsive, emotional, but fiercely loyal. After Diana's death, Charles tried, in his own clumsy way, to be present for his sons. But as Harry grew into manhood, cracks began to form. Still, Charles held hope. Even after the Oprah interview, even after Spare, even after all the accusations, he maintained quiet channels of communication with Harry. There were occasional calls, tentative texts, and gestures that indicated, at the very least, a desire to mend what had been broken. Privately, Charles told aides that he believed time would heal the divide. He even discussed finding a minor ceremonial role for Harry at future royal events, hoping that familiarity might restore something like affection. William's decision crushed that hope. By cutting Harry and Meghan off permanently, William had not only shut a door, he had sealed it shut. For Charles, it felt like losing Harry all over again. It wasn't just the physical distance of Montecito or the bitterness of media interviews. It was the finality of institutional abandonment, and it was happening under his watch, triggered by his heir. Reports from inside the palace say Charles was visibly shattered following the final meeting where William's plan was endorsed. He canceled his remaining engagements that day and retreated to his private residence. A member of the king's inner circle revealed. He did not speak for hours. Not to staff, not to Camilla. He just walked the garden path alone for nearly the entire evening. But there was another layer to Charles's pain, a realization that this was, perhaps, the inevitable outcome of everything that had come before. For decades, the royal family had managed its dysfunction with suppression. Scandals were buried. Emotions were hidden. The royal motto, never complain, never explain, had papered over wounds that festered behind palace doors. Now, all of that had collapsed into the open, and Charles was witnessing the cost. Sources close to the king say he began reflecting aloud about Queen Elizabeth's leadership. She never had to do this, he reportedly said in one quiet moment. She kept the family together. Even when they broke her heart, she kept them close. There was a note of guilt in his voice, insiders say a feeling that he had failed not just as a monarch, but as the glue that once held the House of Windsor together. Camilla, Queen Consort, reportedly comforted Charles in private. Though often seen as a strong, steely presence, she has grown into a stabilizing force for Charles in emotional crises. Aides say she remained composed but deeply concerned, recognizing that the emotional strain on the king could begin to affect his physical health, already a sensitive issue following recent medical reports that have not been publicly disclosed. One of the more striking elements of this period was how Charles began pulling away from public view in the days that followed. Though official royal correspondents insisted all was well, palace insiders noted a subtle shift in his demeanor. He became less talkative during briefings, more withdrawn during walkabouts. In some moments, he even deferred unexpectedly to William during state meetings, a silent admission that power was shifting faster than even he had anticipated. Yet, despite the heartbreak, Charles never reversed William's course. He never vetoed the plan, nor did he issue any private warning to Harry or Andrew that might soften the blow. In this, perhaps, Charles was acknowledging the inevitable, accepting that William was the future, and the future could no longer afford the burdens of the past. Still, those close to Charles know that the wound remains open. One courtier described it this way: it's not just sadness, it's loss. He's lost the son he once hugged in Africa, the brother he once joked with in Balmoral, the family he once believed could, through tradition and affection, survive anything. Privately, Charles is said to have written personal letters, not public communications, not official dispatches, but handwritten letters, to both Harry and Andrew. The contents of those letters are unknown, but it is believed they express sorrow, not blame. It is one of the few acts Charles could do as a father, not as king, to acknowledge the gravity of what had occurred. Meanwhile, William, while sympathetic to his father's grief, reportedly remained unmoved in his decision. "I'm doing this for George," he allegedly said to a close friend. "He deserves a monarchy that isn't trapped in scandal or regret." And with those words, the generational divide came into full view. Charles holding on to the family, William preparing to let parts of it go. In many ways, Charles's tears marked the passing of a certain kind of monarchy, one bound by blood over duty, affection over structure. What is rising in its place under William is something colder, sharper, more rigid, but perhaps, in an era of brutal media scrutiny and waning public patience, more sustainable. The monarchy doesn't simply break ties with members through conversation or emotion. It does so through structure, protocol, and carefully orchestrated actions that ripple through every corner of the institution. After Prince William's declaration, the machinery of royalty moved swiftly, not with anger, but with the clinical precision of an institution determined to excise what it could no longer afford to carry. The final cut, the formal, public stripping of privileges, titles, and royal associations, was as profound as it was unprecedented. Unlike past royal punishments, which were often slow, vague, or handled quietly, this time the decision was executed through official channels, paperwork, and policy. William's position was unambiguous. The moment had come to translate words into action and remove all traces of entitlement from three individuals once central to the House of Windsor's public life. For Prince Andrew, the process began with a direct communication from the Lord Chamberlain's office, the highest authority responsible for ceremonial royal matters. It outlined the withdrawal of his remaining honorary military affiliations, which until then had been held in abeyance rather than formally revoked. His roles as Colonel of the Grenadier Guards, Honorary Air Commodore of RAF Lossiemouth, and Royal Colonel of the Royal Highland Fusiliers were officially dissolved. The move was long overdue in the public's eyes, but had remained postponed out of sensitivity to the Queen during her final years. Additionally, Andrew was instructed to cease any appearances or engagement on behalf of charities and institutions that had retained him as patron or founder. A coordinated message was distributed to all such organizations, urging them to update their public records and official websites. He was no longer to be referenced as His Royal Highness in any formal setting. While Andrew retained the title Duke of York, one of the oldest and most historically significant peerages, he was barred from using it in any capacity connected to public representation. The palace began an internal audit to determine which properties, funds, and privileges remain linked to that title and where adjustments needed to be made. Even his use of Royal Lodge, the mansion he has occupied for years, was brought under review. No final eviction notice was issued, but a subtle campaign to encourage his voluntary departure was underway, signaling that even his royal address was becoming untenable. For Meghan Markle and Prince Harry, the process was even more layered. Since their departure in 2020, the couple had walked a precarious line, maintaining royal titles while claiming independence. Though they no longer used Her Royal Highness titles in public, the formal right to those stylings had not been revoked by royal decree. That changed under William's directive. The Office of the Privy Council, acting on advice from the Prince of Wales, initiated the drafting of updated letters patent, a centuries-old instrument used by the sovereign to define and regulate matters of nobility and royal status. The proposed update specifically targeted the HRH designations of both Harry and Meghan, as well as their use of the Sussex dukedom in public-facing ventures. Although technically only the reigning monarch could approve such a document, King Charles was said to have signed it quietly, without fanfare or public ceremony. The approval was made with a note attached, with deep regret and hope for healing in time. The content of the document made no mention of emotion. It was bureaucratic in tone, decisive in scope. From the moment the letters patent took effect, no official document, not a press release, birth announcement, legal filing, or royal correspondence, would refer to the Duke and Duchess of Sussex in those terms. Public departments, foreign embassies, and event organizers were all issued guidance. Do not invite, promote, or reference Harry and Meghan as members of the royal family. Their roles as patrons of various royal-supported organizations were formally severed. Any existing honorary military titles held by Harry, such as Captain General of the Royal Marines or Honorary Air Commandant of RAF Honington, were rescinded with immediate effect. These were positions Harry had once valued deeply, often describing his military service as the defining chapter of his life. Their loss was not ceremonial. It was personal. Moreover, the palace coordinated with British intelligence and security agencies to redefine Harry and Meghan's protection status. Since stepping back as senior royals, they had contested their removal from publicly funded security, even taking legal action against the UK government. But following this final cut, any argument for reinstatement became legally and politically impossible. They were now private citizens in every formal respect. One area of particularly delicate handling was the treatment of their children, Archie and Lilibet. At the time of Queen Elizabeth II's death, the children had technically inherited the right to be styled as prince and princess under the rules established by the 1917 Letters Patent. However, William's move changed the political will behind those rules. While no public announcement was made regarding the children's titles, royal watchers noted a quiet change. The royal family's official website no longer listed Archie and Lilibet with any royal styling. Aides emphasized that decisions regarding the children were made with compassion and long-term considerations, but the message was clear: the lineage may continue, but the titles do not. The reaction to these sweeping measures varied across the spectrum. Royal traditionalists praised the move as a long-overdue correction, a re-establishment of clear royal boundaries in an era muddied by scandal and commerce. To them, this wasn't cruelty. It was the defense of heritage. They argued that the crown's credibility depended on more than blood. It required consistency, dignity, and the courage to say no when necessary. Supporters of the Sussexes, however, saw it differently. In progressive circles, particularly across the U.S., the final cut was described as vindictive and excessive. Prominent commentators accused the monarchy of silencing voices rather than engaging in difficult conversations. The move reignited debates around race, tradition, and the lingering effects of colonial-era hierarchy within the royal establishment. Even among neutral observers, there was shock at the thoroughness of the separation. Analysts pointed out that such complete revocation of rights and roles had not occurred in modern royal history. Even Edward VIII, who abdicated the throne for love, retained his dukedom in HRH style. The fact that 3 members of the family, including a son of the reigning monarch, had been erased from the royal ledger sent a message louder than any speech. Within the UK, the public reaction was largely supportive. Media polls showed that more than half of the population approved of the decision, with a particularly strong consensus among veterans and longtime royalists. Many believed the royal family had been too lenient for too long and applauded William's willingness to enforce accountability where sentiment had failed. But the final cut came with risks. By drawing such hard lines, the monarchy opened itself to questions about where it would draw future boundaries. What constitutes disgrace? Who decides when someone is beyond redemption? Could such tactics backfire if applied inconsistently in the future? Even within the palace, not everyone was comfortable. Some senior aides quietly worried about precedent. Others feared that completely severing ties removed any hope for reconciliation, leaving only bitterness and the potential for retaliatory media campaigns. Already, murmurs of new interviews, new revelations, and new memoirs were circulating in Hollywood circles. Yet William remained unmoved. His team viewed the final cut as a necessity, painful but vital. In their strategic assessments, lingering ambiguity was more dangerous than decisive action. Every compromise made in the name of family had eroded the crown's position. It was time, they argued, to stop apologizing for doing what must be done to preserve the institution's dignity. As one advisor bluntly stated, the monarchy isn't a family business. It's a constitutional symbol. You don't protect it with emotion. You protect it with clarity. As news of William's irreversible decision swept through the world, attention swiftly shifted to the one person who had once been the monarchy's most charismatic rebel, Prince Harry. For a man who had spent the last few years breaking royal norms, speaking out against the palace, and crafting a new life in the hills of Montecito, the silence from Harry in the immediate aftermath of the declaration was deafening. No press release. No Instagram statement. No coordinated media counteroffensive, at least not at first. But inside those quiet days following the bombshell, something was happening. The man once known as the Spare, who had already written one book and hinted at a sequel, was now cornered in a way that he likely never expected. His royal identity, the very foundation of his global relevance and brand leverage, had just been stripped to its bare bones. And make no mistake, while Harry had claimed independence from the institution, the truth was far more nuanced. Much of his post-royal identity was still heavily intertwined with his past. From the cover of his memoir to the opening credits of his Netflix series with Meghan, Royal imagery and references were not just artistic choices, they were the currency. It was the juxtaposition of a runaway royal that made Harry marketable. That gave his story weight. Now, with the official line drawn by William, Harry faced a new reality. He was no longer semi-detached. He was cut off. Legally, socially, and structurally. The last symbolic threads tying him to the monarchy were gone. According to sources close to the Sussexes, Harry was not only stunned by the finality of the decision, he was furious. A friend from his military days reportedly received a late-night call where Harry vented for over an hour. He allegedly said, "It's like being erased by your own brother. Like I never existed in that world." That same source claims Harry questioned whether this was truly William acting alone, or whether palace advisors had finally manipulated the future king into making a move they had long pushed for. But beyond the emotion, there were immediate questions about how this would affect Harry's life and work. First and foremost, security. Harry has fought a multi-year legal battle with the UK government to maintain the right to pay for police protection while on British soil. The core of his argument was that, due to his royal status and inherited threat level, he required and deserved state-backed security. But with the formal severance now complete, that argument had lost critical ground. He was now, in every practical sense, a private citizen, not just in choice, but in royal designation. Legal analysts quickly noted that his security appeal, already controversial, had become nearly unwinnable. Without a royal title, without royal duties, without even the possibility of return, the Home Office had far less incentive or justification to make exceptions for him. Some predicted that Harry would soon be forced to accept private, lower-tier protection contracts during future UK visits, or simply stop visiting altogether. Then came the question of narrative. For years, Harry and Meghan had crafted a carefully balanced story, one that painted them as both outsiders and insiders. They were royals wronged, victims of a cold institution, but still figures of royal lineage. It was that unique positioning that allowed them to tell their story with authenticity and access. Now, with the monarchy making it clear that the door was closed, the couple's narrative risked collapsing into irrelevance. Without ongoing connection to the crown, future projects that relied on royal proximity could seem stale or exploitative. Sources close to Netflix hinted that executives were caught off guard by the severity of William's move. At least 2 planned documentary extensions, originally intended to explore life after the palace, were suddenly put on hold. There was concern that without new access or revelations, the content would reek of repetition. For a platform built on novelty and impact, that wasn't acceptable. But Meghan, according to reports, was already pivoting. One Los Angeles insider noted that her team was exploring rebranding angles, less royal truth-teller, more global humanitarian. Meghan, the source said, viewed the final cut as freeing. While Harry took it as a rejection, Meghan reportedly saw it as a business reset. A way to finally distance herself from the drama and reposition as a figure outside the royal bubble. This difference in reaction exposed a deeper fissure. While Meghan had always felt like an outsider to the institution, Harry was born into it. The crown, for better or worse, had been part of his soul. And the sudden ejection, led by his own brother, wasn't just a political loss. It was a personal betrayal. Behind the scenes, Harry reportedly debated a countermove. Some insiders believe he considered granting a major U.S. television interview to set the record straight. Others say he contemplated rushing out his next memoir with more explosive claims. But wiser voices within his circle urged caution. "You've already told your side," one friend allegedly said. "If you speak now, it'll sound like vengeance, not truth." Still, Harry couldn't stay silent forever. Roughly 2 weeks after the announcement, he issued a short but emotionally loaded statement via his Archwell Foundation. Though carefully worded, the message was widely interpreted as a veiled response to William's decision. It read, "My commitment to service, to compassion, and to community remains unchanged. Titles don't define integrity. Family does." The message landed like a coded blow. It didn't name names, but the message was unmistakable. Harry was pushing back against the idea that his value, or his legacy, could be dictated by a royal declaration. Yet for all its elegance, the statement raised more questions than it answered. Did Harry still see himself as part of the family? Was he holding on to a hope that Charles might reverse course? Or was this simply his attempt to reclaim public sympathy? Observers noted that Harry had gone quiet again after the statement. No further interviews. No follow-up comments. No retaliatory media blitz. This led some to believe he was waiting to see whether public opinion would shift in his favor. If the British media began criticizing William's ruthlessness, Harry might find a strategic opportunity to re-enter the conversation. But if support remained behind the monarchy, he risked being viewed as clinging to a fading identity. What made the situation even more complex was the question of his children. Archie and Lilibet, though now technically titleless and absent from royal documents, remained grandchildren of the king. There were whispers that Harry might seek a private conversation with Charles to at least preserve a symbolic bond between his children and the monarchy. Not for status, but for heritage. But any such conversation would require navigating around William, the architect of the cut. One insider familiar with the brothers' current relationship put it bluntly: they don't speak. At all. Not a text. Not a call. Not even through intermediaries. William has gone full lockdown, and Harry doesn't know how to break through it. In that silence, Harry now stands at a crossroads. He can escalate, launch new public criticisms, double down on his royal grievances, and try to rally public sympathy. Or he can pull back, accept the new reality, redefine his public identity, and allow time, perhaps decades, to thaw the icy divide. For now, he appears to be choosing the latter. But those closest to him warn that peace is not guaranteed. He's hurting, one said. And Harry's hurt has a habit of turning into fire. As the news of Prince William's decision to permanently sever ties with Prince Harry, Meghan Markle, and Prince Andrew echoed across continents, a separate storm began to brew on the other side of the Atlantic, one centered on Meghan Markle herself. Once hailed as a symbol of modern royalty and progress, Meghan now found herself navigating a drastically altered landscape. The decision out of Kensington Palace didn't just cut titles and privileges. It reshaped the very foundation upon which Meghan had built her post-royal identity. For Meghan, the move was both expected and insulting. According to sources close to her, she wasn't surprised by the outcome. She had anticipated it ever since tensions began to escalate during the Queen's final years. But while she may have expected it, the official and public nature of the break reportedly stung in a way that felt deeply personal. Meghan never wanted back in, one Hollywood PR executive familiar with her team claimed, but she didn't want to be erased either. That tension between freedom and recognition had always been central to Meghan's story. She didn't want to return to royal life, but she also didn't want to be stripped of the dignity that came with her title, her station, and the historic uniqueness of her marriage. In her own narrative, Meghan has often positioned herself as a survivor of both institutional rigidity and personal attacks. The final rejection from the royal family, led by William and approved by King Charles, presented a new challenge: how to preserve her global relevance without leaning on the very structure that had just dismissed her. And yet, if there's one area where Meghan has consistently demonstrated strength, it's reinvention. Within days of the announcement, sources say Meghan's team began re-strategizing her public trajectory. The plan, according to insiders, involved 4 key pillars: brand repositioning, media distancing, personal storytelling, and international philanthropy. The first step was redefining the brand. Meghan's previous ventures, from the Archetypes podcast to her Netflix series, had walked a careful line between personal vulnerability and royal storytelling. They relied on her experiences within the monarchy, the contrast between palace life and Hollywood values, and the emotional fallout of being caught between two worlds. Now, that narrative no longer had new chapters. The royal door had been slammed shut, and with it, the appeal of inside access. So Meghan's team began quietly rebranding her image: less duchess, more global humanitarian. A return to her pre-royal activist roots was underway. Meetings were reportedly held with global NGOs and media producers to explore partnerships that would recenter Meghan as a thought leader, not a tabloid figure. She wanted to move away from the royal family shadow and instead align herself with causes that transcended monarchy, maternal health, education access, and racial justice among them. But not everyone believed the shift was authentic. Critics accused her of opportunism, claiming that she used her royal connection to launch a global profile, only to abandon the responsibilities when the relationship became strained. Some former royal staffers even alleged that Meghan's newfound focus on humanitarian work was a calculated smokescreen to regain control over her public image, now that the royal link had been forcibly severed. Still, the plan moved forward. Meghan's team began discussions about launching a new digital media platform, one focused not on royal revelations, but on curated wellness, leadership interviews, and social commentary. Think Oprah meets Goop, one insider described it. The idea was to create a space where Meghan's voice could lead without always being defined by the institution she had left behind. In tandem with this, Meghan reportedly began declining interview requests related to the royal family. At least 2 U.S. outlets were told she was not interested in commenting on outdated dynamics. This was a marked shift from her past approach, where she had frequently discussed the hardships she faced inside the royal system. Privately, however, Meghan was said to be furious, not necessarily at the revocation itself, but at the manner in which it was handled. According to one insider, Meghan believed the palace had used William as a shield, a future king making a brutal decision that Charles himself didn't have the stomach to execute directly. The same source said Meghan viewed the move as performative, a way to appease critics and protect the royal brand by scapegoating her and Harry permanently. Another concern for Meghan was the long-term impact on her children. While she had long claimed that she did not care whether Archie and Lilibet had royal titles, the decision to scrub their recognition entirely from royal records was interpreted by many as punitive. Meghan reportedly told a confidant that she worried the children would grow up cut off from a part of themselves, not because of their own actions, but because of a family feud they didn't choose. Still, Meghan did not take public action to reverse the decision. There were no lawsuits, no press conferences, no formal protests. Her silence, carefully managed, was part of the strategy. Her team believed that playing the long game, presenting herself as above the drama, would serve her image better than waging another media battle. It was a shift from past tactics and, to some, a sign of maturity. To others, it was simply rebranding. Meanwhile, across the media landscape, analysts debated whether Meghan could truly separate from the monarchy in the public imagination. Despite her efforts, she remained associated with the royal family.